welcome to the Sage 50 Cloud Pastel Accounting Topic webinar. My name is Joanne Barnard and I will be your panelist for today. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be discussing file tables. Now guys, I want to be very clear, I'm not teaching you how to do data fixing. We're discussing the file table, which means that I'm going to discuss what is in the files, whether they can be rebuilt or overwritten, and the reason behind that. So I'm not taking you into the pervasive control center. I'm not going to show you how to do data fixing. If that's something you're interested in, you need to speak to our training department and they can then set you up with that kind of training. This is just so that you understand how Pastel works. So that being said, firstly, a lot of the time people, where do I even see the file table? I don't know what that is. Where do I even see it? What you're going to do is you're going to go to help and you're going to go to Pastel help. And for, I know why. Sorry guys, my apologies. I upgraded recently. In the event that this happens, you will need to download and install the help file. So you may be told that it is not installed. If you click on it, it will take you to pastelupdate.sagesouthafrica.co.za. And then you will need to install the help file. So this will happen when you upgrade to a different build, to a different version. It does on occasion tell you that file is missing. You just need to download the file and then run the file accordingly. This should only take a few moments. So then you'll click on it to run it, and that should launch the installation. And once we've installed, you will then go through the help file to get the file table. Okay, so old version, that was my issue. It had to remove the old version and I should now be able to install the new version. Accept or nothing will happen, and it should install accordingly. The help file should then open. What I normally do is I go to search and I type in file table and list topics. And guys, you'll see here we have file table. So it's going to list a number of topics, but it's actually called file table. And if you open that, it is going to give you the files as well as an explanation of what's in them. These are the files that you actually find within every single company. So we're not talking about the root folder. This is what we call a root folder. When you go into your Pastel or your Express folder, you'll have your companies and then you'll have these different DB files or DAT files. This is your root folder. A lot of the stuff is how Pastel runs. However, the files we are referring to are the files within our company. So all of these .dat files. Now there are a number of files here that can be rewritten, rebuilt or overwritten. But you need to know which is which. Sometimes people assume because they could, for example, overwrite the note file, accnote.dat, which is somewhere here, that means that they can overwrite all the files. And we find that on occasion people are like, oh, I've got this error, I can't get rid of it. Oh, I know what I'll do. I got told how to overwrite a file, so I'm just going to overwrite it. Guys, it does not work for every file. There are certain files that if you get a critical error when rebuilding, your only option is to restore a backup. You cannot overwrite the file and be like, oh, Datafix will fix it. There are a few files where you can do that with, and yes, we will fix it depending on the severity of the fix. But for example, if you overwrite acctrn.dat, we are going to tell you to restore a backup because that is your transaction file. Every transaction you have ever done in the system is written to that file. And if you overwrite that file, the amount of errors and issues that are going to occur, the missing transactions, all of that, it's not worth the fix. You will be paying a lot of money and we will be spending months to fix that data. It is better to just restore a backup and redo any missing work. So that's what this webinar is about, to tell you what's in these files, the difference between the two rebuild options, and whether it's a rebuild or it's an overwrite if the rebuild doesn't work. So guys, as I said, you've got your file table. Now I've spoken about rebuilding, and I just mentioned that there are two types of rebuilds. There's something called the Pastel rebuild. So I'm just going to say rebuild. Guys, I've got a number of on my PC, so please don't hold it against me. So basically the Pastel rebuild for 18, 19, they look the same, would look like this. And this is actually the Pastel rebuild, and I think it looked like this from 14. And basically what you do here is you would select the company and then you would select the file that is being complained about. Now there's this rebuild, but then there's also your pervasive rebuild. So I just want to find my Actian. So guys, I'm running pervasive 13, so I look for Actian, not pervasive. And over here, you also have your pervasive rebuild. Now, the difference between these two rebuilds is what the Pastel rebuild does is it will take a specific file. Let's say, for example, we have to rebuild ACCMAS. That is your general ledger master file. So we're going to go and have a look. And we're going to select the file. If I'm rebuilding in Pastel, firstly, you always need to make sure that you have a backup. Please never perform a rebuild without doing a backup. If you cannot get into the company, then what you do is you navigate to where the company is, right click and say send to compress zip. This is called a manual backup. Please make a backup. It is imperative that you do so. If we are then going to do a Pastel rebuild, what happens is it looks at the ACCMAS file. It will look at the data table, and what it does is it creates a copy. And it's going to copy all the information from the one file where we've got the corruption into a brand new file without corruption. And it renames that file to .old. The problem with this is, let's say you get a critical error 2. It has created a brand new table and it's already called the other one old. So if no information writes, you're now left with a blank file. If you go into Pastel and try to update again, you're not going to have the error, but you're also not going to have your entire general ledger master file. So guys, this is why on rebuilding, it's also imperative that you run a data integrity after. But that is what the Pastel rebuild does, is it creates a brand new table. And if it can't write the information to that table, Pastel doesn't then go, oh, I need to delete this new table and put the old one back. It just leaves it like that. So please understand that if you are going to rebuild, just because the error is gone doesn't mean that you don't have problems. You've got to run a data integrity. The pervasive rebuild, on the other hand, does not do that. It rebuilds the actual table itself. So it doesn't create a copy. It doesn't try to copy the information across. If the pervasive rebuild fails, you will still have the error in your company because it's not a brand new table that it's created. Here, you need to go to add though, so it's a little bit more complicated. You would need to then select all files and you would need to navigate to the location of your company folder. You would then have to look through and find the file that you are looking for. So in this case, ACCMAS.dat. So there it is. And you would say open, and it will then open it. You then say next until it rebuilds. If there are errors, it will tell you that there are errors. So guys, in this case, there will, because my company is one open. But it would then tell you that there are errors. Sorry, I actually wanted to go back there. I didn't mean to exit. And you can then go and see what those errors are. Now, certain errors, it's because it doesn't have access to the file. You know, it's not a critical error. If you get an error 2 or a critical error, then yeah, guys, you need to restore a backup. That is the honest answer that we're going to give you. In very rare circumstances, yes, you could overwrite a file, but you need to understand what overwriting that file is going to cause. So in this instance, next. So here errors were detected. You go to view the log and then it's going to tell you. So in this instance, it could not be processed, and it's basically telling you that the code was 88, which actually means it just doesn't have permission because you never perform a rebuild in an open company. Guys, honestly, if my demo breaks, I'm not too bothered. I will restore it because I did a backup first. So guys, you always make sure that the company is closed, but this was to generate errors. So it will generate an error log. You can have a look, but if it says error 2 or critical 2, that means that it failed to rebuild, that the corruption on that file is incredibly severe and it cannot do it. That's what it means. However, in this instance, as I said, let's say that I close my Pastel, or we rebuild a different company quickly. Going to go into 14 and demo. So to see how it looks, this will give you the number of files it rebuilt. So if I say rebuild, it will tell you 89 of 89 records, which is what you want to see. That's really important. If it gives you an error like critical 2, you need to check records, how many were rebuilt, because that is the amount of records that you will have. And depending on the file, that's not a good thing. So this is how that one runs, but then it creates that duplicate. If you need to rebuild everything, it's not very often that we'll tell you to do this, but on occasion we do. I often then will use the Pastel rebuild. I will only use a pervasive rebuild if I get critical errors here. If you do have to rebuild everything, please never rebuild any file that says ACC PRM. It is a parameter file. You never rebuild parameter files. So ACC PRM Co, ACC PRM DC, ACC PRM GL, PS, ST, SY. These are all parameter files. You never rebuild them. You need to deselect them, and then you can say rebuild. This is just a way for us to see sometimes there's certain errors. We're not 100% sure what's causing the error. We'll tell you rebuild all the company files just to make sure there's no corruption. In that case, using the Pastel rebuild is your best option, because to have to go and select all of those in the pervasive rebuild can take some time. If you're prepared to do it, that's great. But generally, we just rebuild this way. Okay, so guys, that being said, I'm going to go through the different files themselves. So the first file that we spoke about was your note file. If you look, the note file stores all the notes for your notepad. Now, a lot of people go, what does that mean? What is your notepad? So guys, honestly, the notepad is all of your notes, and it's, for example, all of your system audit trail. Your whole system audit trail actually stores to the note file. If you go and you go to your customers and you set up notes, it is going to store to the note file. So a lot of the different changes within the system write to the note file so that we can pull that information. But that file itself can become very, very large, and sometimes that can slow down Pastel because maybe you've got a lot of notes on your customers, your suppliers, maybe you've created a lot of letters, maybe you've never actually come in and actually deleted your system audit trail. So guys, that is something you can do. Please don't do it for your current year because your auditors need that information, but you know, you can, for example, delete it for 2 years ago. So I'm running my 2020 and 2021 company. I will delete my 29th up to Feb 2020, and my auditors won't have an issue. So you can do it that way, but sometimes, unfortunately, that file itself can become very corrupted, or it might be giving a major issue and rebuilding it doesn't work. Deleting the history doesn't work, so the only thing that we can do is overwrite it. Now, to overwrite, and it is an overwrite file, you can overwrite it, but then you need to know that if your auditors ask you for a system audit trail, you're probably going to have missing information. So one, make a backup in case you can still pull that information off of a backup. And two, the way that you do that is you go into the root folder, you go into custom, and you go into language. And what you're going to do is you're going to go ACC note, and it will find an ENG. You will copy this ENG, and you will then go into your company folder. In your company folder, you will paste, and you will then rename this one to old. And you will rename your .dat to, or your ENG to DAT. Again, guys, I've got the company open, which is why it won't allow me. So it would give you an error, but you will basically take that ENG, rename DAT, and it will then use that as a blank file. So the note is one that you can overwrite. And it does contain your audit trail as well as all of the notes on your customers, suppliers, inventory, etc. within the system. Guys, then we have our ACMAS. This is our general ledger master file. Now, guys, this contains all of the master file information for your general ledger as well as the general ledger period balances. This file you can rebuild. In very, very, very rare circumstances, the ACMAS, ACMAS-D, and ACMAS-C can be overwritten, and I will tell you the circumstances shortly, but these are basically your master files. So ACMAS is your general ledger master, ACMAS-D is your customer master, so D for debtors, and ACMAS-C, C for creditors, is your supplier master. So this contains all of your customer accounts and their master file balances, your suppliers and their master file balances, and your general ledger and the balances. Now, guys, generally you rebuild these files. The only time you can overwrite these files is if, one, you have a backup that does not have the error, it is for the current year, and you are going to have to go into that specific backup. So, for example, let's say that my backup that I made for my demo, I would have to basically take my demo, unzip it, go in and look for my ACMAS or my ACMAS-D or my ACMAS-C. Guys, I see that there's a question. I just need to make sure that I'm not losing sound or anything. Yes, the webinar is being recorded. Thank you. So guys, yes, the webinar is being recorded. It will be made available to you. That was just the question. But guys, so in this instance, you would have to go into a backup. You cannot overwrite the file from the custom language. If you do that, it's going to be blank. We're not going to be able to fix it. But it has to be a backup of the current year, and then you can copy it over. What you will have to do thereafter is you will have to run a data integrity. So you'll have to come in after writing it and you will have to run data integrity, because what you're going to find is that you're going to be given a list of master file accounts that are not in balance. So you can overwrite it. It will have to come in for a data fix. Once we fix it, we'll send it back to you and the file will be fine, but only in those very specific circumstances. Off of a backup, which has the same year and you don't have the error on that file. Now, you won't have it on your customer master and your supplier master and your GL master at the same time. It will be one or the other. But remember, after you've made the backup, you have to come in and you have to verify the data. You are going to get errors. So guys, for example, I don't even know, I don't think that I've processed, but basically it would give you errors. And that will be a data fix. And then you need to remember that a data fix means 24 to 48 working, or 1 to 2 working days downtime. You cannot process while we're fixing your data. Reason for that is we're working off of a backup. When we send that fix back up to you, any work you've done is going to be overwritten. That's why you can't process. A lot of the time people are like, I can't afford not to process. Well, unless you're going to export your batches and import them into the data that we fix, it's not worth you doing it, because you are going to have to redo it because of the fact that you're going to overwrite that data. We work off of a backup, not live data. So guys, that's just something to bear in mind. So yes, these can be overwritten with a file from a working backup that has the same financial year in it. But then you will have to run data integrity, and it is a data fix, and that is 1 to 2 working days to fix that data. Then guys, your ACC DELIV is your customer delivery addresses. So guys, it's actually all of the customer information. So basically, if you customer and supplier, if you go edit customer accounts, all of this information, your postal addresses, your delivery addresses, the contact information, if that file is corrupted and you get a critical error, all of that information is going to be gone. That does not mean that you can't go and recapture it. So this is one of the few files like the note that you can overwrite by going to custom language, but then you need to remember that all of your customer information will be missing. A quick way to fix that is if you have a backup with most of the customer information in, what you can do is make a backup of your current data that has the error, restore that backup, export your customer and supplier master files. So you're going to do a file import export. And what you would do is you would export the customer master and your supplier master, re-restore the data set with the problem, overwrite the file from custom language. You look for ACC DELV, and you rename it from ENG to .dat in the company, and then just import your data. It should put most of it back so that you don't have to come and recapture everything, but that is all that you lose, is you're just going to lose the contact information. So in this instance, you need to decide what is going to be worse. Is it going to be worse to restore a backup and redo work, or is it, or is it going to be worse to overwrite that file and have to recapture all of your contact information? Bearing in mind, you can do the export import option. Then guys, if we look, we've got our ACCTRN. So that is the 6th file, but it is the most important file within your company data set. So guys, as I said, this is every transaction that you have ever processed in the company, whether you, and remember your companies, although you can only see this year and last year, all of your transactions, all of the history remains in that company until you choose to delete it. So if you've been running a company for 10 years and you've never deleted history, that transaction file has 10 years worth of information. If this file gets a critical error, guys, we can't fix it. That is a restore, and you are going to have to find a backup that works. Overwriting this file and sending it to us and going, hey, I have a few errors. Guys, you're probably going to be talking about pages and pages and pages of missing transactions. For us to try to figure out what those transactions are very, very difficult. And in all honesty, it is, you are going to be paying, I think it's like 800 Rand an hour to try to have data fixed, and it's going to take weeks, if not months, to fix. Whereas if you restore a backup, you know exactly where that backup was, you know what information is going to be missing, and if you printed out your information or you saved it, you'll be able to go and see and recapture that information. That's why there are times where people send us data and we will phone you back and go, unfortunately, Datafix can't fix this. You need to restore a backup. If you don't have a backup, guys, or a backup that you can use, then you're going to need to get hold of your auditor. And this is one of those horrible cases where you're going to need to start a new company, take on balances, and then capture anything that's missing. So this is not a file that you want to get corrupted. This is why backup is key, and also company management is so important. I ran the importance of company management at the beginning of the year. Guys, it goes hand in hand. You don't want your files to get too big. Pervasive can only really handle files up to 2 gigs. So each one of these files can only go up to 2 gigs. Yes, there is a way in Pervasive to turn off its segmenting files after 2 gigs. But guys, if your files individually are getting to over 2 gigs each, you are either have a lot of history in them and you need to delete history, or you are processing so many transactions that Pastel is actually not the best fit for you anymore, and you are no longer a small or very new medium business, but you are a medium to large business, and you need to look at our other options, because the bigger a file gets, the more chance of corruption, even in a standalone machine. So please bear that in mind, guys. If you don't know how the company management works, or you didn't attend that webinar, please let us know. We're happy to send that through to you, the recording of that webinar. But company management is very important for the health of your files. Then guys, you'll have your ACC user file. Now this file actually should never be rebuilt, nor should it be overwritten. If anything happens to your ACC user file, you actually need to get hold of us, because there's a very good chance that we will need to actually get the data in, and we will have to reset that file completely. And there's a very specific fix to that to make sure that the passwords and everything still work. So guys, ACC user should not be overwritten, nor should it be rebuilt. You can try to rebuild it and see if it works, make a backup, but what may happen is you may corrupt the table completely, and passwords may then no longer work. So you can try the rebuild. Generally, I advise not rebuilding, not overwriting, but getting hold of us and sending it in so that we can reset it, or just chatting to support and we can give you the best advice. Then guys, you've got your ACC sale. This is your sales analysis master. So if you are using sales analysis codes, so edit customers, and you have set up sales analysis codes, this is your sales analysis master. So it is going to run however you set up those analysis codes here. So it is going to check, okay, these are all of the invoices, these are your salespeople, this is my commission, am I on paid invoices, am I on any invoices, how does it work, this is how much Jenny is owed, this is how much Nancy is owed, this is how much Temba is owed, and that's what it's going to look at. So if something happens to this file, it is a rebuild only. If you rebuild it and you still get an error, guys, you're going to have to do a restore. This is not something that you can overwrite. Again, this has a lot of transactional history in, and we need to make sure that the transactional history is correct. Then guys, your ACC PRD is your inventory master file. Now, I've had people overwrite this file, but guys, honestly, it's not a file you want to overwrite. This again is a rebuild only. Overwriting this file breaks the link between your master file and your multi-store transaction file. So every time you process using inventory, yes, it writes to your ACC TRN file, but it also writes to your multi-store transaction file, which is ACC STK. Sorry guys, these aren't in order, so I'm just trying to find it. Okay, that's your link. So it breaks this file and it breaks this file. ACC STK ST. And what will happen is that your activity will be completely incorrect, and it will not tie up until you start processing again. So if you're okay for your activity and your history to never tie up, you can overwrite this file if you're having major issues. Again, guys, this is all of your inventory master information. So that means that you'll have to reset up all of your codes and your items, and basically you will be setting up everything here. But it also means that even if you do an export and an import, your activity will be completely blank until you start processing again. So it breaks the linking between those files, and guys, we cannot recreate that linking. If you do this, that linking is broken and there's nothing that we can do to fix it. So please bear that in mind. This is not something to do lightly, but that is one of the downsides. And then you need to know that the activity and the history are never going to tie up. And this is obviously a way for you to see what's happening. And if you can't trust this, I don't know if it's worth it, to be honest. I have had, in the 12 years I've been with Pastel, I've only had 2 people who have opted for that, and they're like, no, it's fine, that's what we're doing. Most people would rather restore the backup and redo whatever work is missed. Then guys, your open item file. This is if you have set up your customers and your suppliers to be open item. Now remember, there are 2 ways that Pastel can work, open item or balance forward. Open item means that you can match individual payments and you can match payments and receipts to individual invoices. So if your debtor or your creditor, you pay your creditor, this specific 20,000 was for this invoice, but I still have these 4 invoices outstanding. If your debtor or your customer pays you, they will tell you it's for invoice 597. You know to match it to invoice 597. They then may ask you what else is outstanding, and you can tell them there's invoice 348 and 794. And they can then make those payments. So that's open item. You can see exactly what invoices are outstanding and what you need to follow up with. Balance forward, on the other hand, is no matching or automatic matching. So what you've done is you've gone, you know what, I don't want to hassle with matching at all. What I'm going to do is the payments and the receipts that come in, I will either match from oldest down or in the period they were processed. And although there are 5 invoices that make up 100,000, if the client pays 20,000, that just means that 80,000 is outstanding. So you can't tell them which invoices are outstanding. You can just tell them, hi, on your account, you've made this payment, however, this much is what is outstanding still. So that's balance forward. Now, because of open item and because of its matching, it has its own table. This is a file that you can rebuild, but guys, if you overwrite this file, all of the open item transactional history will disappear and you will have pages and pages of OI diff. If you have a major issue on this file, it needs to come in for a data fix, unless it's giving you a critical error, in which case, guys, it's one of those, you have to restore a backup. Just overwriting this file is going to cause pages and pages of open item out of balance. And guys, we are not going to be able to fix thousands of transactions because you chose to delete the file. Yes, you can go and convert from open item to balance forward and back to open item. But guys, that's not if you're getting an error which requires a rebuild. That is just, okay, I can't match this, or I've got open item out of balance on this one customer and I really don't want to have to send this in for a data fix. You can then go to your change menu and you can run the open item and balance forward conversion on that one customer or that one supplier. Convert it to balance forward and back. You will lose your open item ability, however, or all the transactions, but you will then, going forward, recreate the open item history. So just something to bear in mind, if however you get a status 2, a status 46, a status 146 on this file, you cannot overwrite it. It is a rebuild only file. It contains all of your open item transactional history. You do not want to cause a major problem with that. It can really mess up your aging as well. Then guys, we've got our general ledger parameter file. Basically, it's all the parameters and things that make your general ledger function. Guys, if you have issues on this file, it's not even a rebuild, it is a restore immediately. However, if it is a status 3, a status 3 is normally a network error. Please don't confuse the statuses. In that case, please rather phone us. We will advise you what to do. But guys, if you're getting like again, a status 2, a status 46, or 146 on this file, you cannot rebuild it. I've never actually seen those on parameter files ever, but you can't rebuild parameter files. It does not work. You will break your company completely. So you've got your general ledger parameter and your tax parameters. So these are just the parameters that make them work. They're things that you have set up. For example, maybe you set up specific tax percentages. That would be in your tax parameters. You have set up specific start and end dates. With your general ledger parameters, you have set certain debits and credits in your entry types. That is all contained in this information. Then your customer and supplier parameters, those are whether open item balance forward, what is my default. You know, basically guys, a lot of the time in your setup, it is all of the information in the controls. That's the best way to explain it. There's also other information in here, but a lot of the time it's the information that's set up in the control. And in the case of the GL parameter, it's some of the information is your entry types. There is other characters and stuff in there that tells us what year it is, whether you've done a snapshot recently, that type of stuff. So these are not files. None of these, your general ledger parameter, your tax parameters, your customer supplier parameters, your point of sale parameters. Sorry guys. Apologies. Your inventory parameters. So none of those files can be rewritten, can be rebuilt or overwritten because they're specific to your company. Yes, if you have an older company, same year, you could try to overwrite them. I personally haven't. Generally, the errors that we see with these, to be very honest, are normally your status 3s, which are workstations trying to open it. It's having an issue opening the parameter file. And then we normally find out that actually there's a 116 or a 161 or a 94. There's like a network communication issue, and we normally troubleshoot that. We don't normally have to rebuild or overwrite those. But those are what these contain. It's how the company runs and certain things you have selected within your company. Then guys, your inventory groups are exactly that. They contain your setup, inventory. I'm just going to close that. And in your setup inventory, if you go to integration groups, it contains all of this information. So do you allocate costs to projects at time of sale or yourself? What are your different groups? Is it integrated? Isn't it integrated? What is the integration entry type? And then what GLs is it meant to write to? So that's what is contained in that file. Again, it is a rebuild, not an overwrite file. If you get an error, guys, we strongly advise that you please restore a backup. Again, there is a linking that we cannot recreate with a Datafix. So you cannot even overwrite it and go, oh, okay, everything's all right. There is specific linking, especially with inventory. There are so many parts of the system that link together that if you don't have that linkage set up correctly, the file itself is actually very broken and then it's not going to work. So again, it's not a file that often comes up. Once I'm done going through the file table, I will advise you the files that generally come up. The inventory group is not one of them because generally it doesn't house that much information. You normally set it up and it is left, but it is a rebuild only. Then guys, your ACC PRDQ. This contains the quantities of your open batches. So basically your open batches, what's meant to happen is when you create a batch, your ACC PRDQ gets updated. It puts the batch as unposted. Then when you update that batch, it's meant to rebuild itself and update it so that you don't have an unposted value and those numbers get affected. So this contains all of the quantities for your quote sales orders, purchase orders, order quantities, so it's your running total. And every time you create a batch, it keeps rebuilding itself. It is also one of the ones that you can go to File, Data Integrity, Rebuild Batch Quantities. So you would do this in the event that you have updated all of your batches, it's still saying unposted, you would run this. If that does not work, then you would rebuild the file. Guys, if that doesn't work, then you need to run something called a stock fix, and if that doesn't work, you need to send the data through to us. We do not advise overwriting this file. That is something that if we feel there's a need to do so, we would rather do it. In all honesty, rebuilding the batch quantity should work, and a stock fix should work. In very, very rare circumstances, that won't work. So this is a rebuild file, but it is meant to rebuild on a continual basis, or basically every time you do a stock. Okay, guys, I see that sound has been lost. Has anyone else lost the sound? Can everyone else still hear me?
I can hear you, Joanne.
Okay, thank you so much, Nancy. Can you just advise them to press F5 or log in and log out again? Thanks. Okay, so guys, basically we were at inventory groups, PRDQ, so that is just your quantities. Then we've got our report writer categories. So many people use Sage Intelligence instead of report writer now, but there are still people who use the report writer. So that is if you go to View, General Ledger, and Report Writer. Now, guys, I prefer Sage Intelligence myself, but basically Report Writer is here, and this contains the Report Writer categories. So on your Edit General Ledger accounts, you will see that there is a normal category, and then there is a report writer category. That is a category that it is referring to. Now, if you overwrite that with the one that is in the language folder, it is going to put it as generic. If you've never changed the report writer categories, it should be fine. Generally, guys, also not a file that's generally come up when files are corrupt, but that's what it contains. It just contains the category. If, however, you overwrite it, you might find that suddenly your categories have changed. If you have custom report writer reports, you might find that suddenly those are no longer working. So please just remember that if you're going to overwrite the report writer categories, you need to know whether you have gone and changed them or not. And if you've got custom reports, that may cause those custom reports to no longer run. Then you've got your financial categories. So guys, that's what you set up in setup, financial categories. Just because we have set it up a specific way doesn't mean that you can't now come and change them. So you could come in here, select financial categories, and we will tell you what we feel they are. And then you will come and change them to what you want. If you get an error, you can overwrite it. However, again, if you changed it, sorry guys, I'm just trying to open that. If you changed it, remember it's going to change it back to what we had, and suddenly you might find that your whole TB is telling you that it's not balancing because it's an unallocated income or balance sheet. So that is what may happen there. Again, guys, I've never actually seen it come up. It is not something that I've actually ever seen corrupted. Then, guys, your customer categories, that's if you go to edit customer and your categories there. If you overwrite it, there aren't going to be any categories. You would have to set them up from scratch again. You could do an export, delete, or export, overwrite, import, but those are your customer categories. Then, guys, you've got your ACCJ code. These are your job codes. So this is for your project tracker, although that's basically what it is. So in Express, they call them projects or cost codes. These were the cost codes, basically. This is where they were created. So this is where your cost codes will show. This is where it will capture information. Then guys, your ACCF code is your foreign currency. So if you're using partner and you're using multi-currency, this will contain your currency codes. So this is where your setup will show. It will show in your F currency. Again, not something that comes up as corrupt often because it doesn't contain the majority of the information. Normally the files that get corrupted are the files that are being updated all the time. Your ACC MAS, ACC MASD, ACC MASC, ACC TRN, ACC HISTL, HISTH. Those type of files are the ones that come up, guys. The ones that contain a little bit of information and it's not often changing, like your inventory groups and your financial categories and your customer categories. It's not something that you change often, or it's not containing thousands of transactions. They don't often corrupt. So your cost codes, it's where you go and set up your projects or your cost codes, and you will then select those projects when you're transacting. This just holds the codes. And then your currency just holds your currency. So those just aren't things that they aren't containing the transactions. These are the currencies that I have, these are my exchange rates, done. That's what's in that file. So a rebuild is what you need to do. I don't advise overwriting because of the fact that you may not do them the same and they may not link properly. There is a linking between these and other files. So these would be rebuilds. They would not be overwrites. Then guys, V8, those are just your literals. This file never comes up and you don't need to do anything with it. ACC disc is your volume-based prices. So if you go and set up a discount on your customers, so you go to edit customers and you set up your discount matrix, that's what is in here. So this will set up those discounts per customer. Again, guys, it's linked to a specific customer. This is something that I would rebuild. Do not overwrite it, just rebuild it. Then ACC BOMH is your bill of materials headers and your bill of materials ACC BOML, your bill of materials lines. Now these I've seen come up again because it's your headers and your lines. So it's your bill of materials documents that you are processing. If you are processing a lot of manufacturing documents, yes, you may find that there's some corruption. These are rebuild only, guys. They link to themselves as well as your ACC MAS file, your ACC TRN file. There are a number of files this links to. You cannot overwrite these files. They are rebuild only. If you get a critical error, restore a backup. Then your link code headers and link code lines. Same thing, guys. They are linking the codes to the headers and the lines, rebuild only. Their job is that they link the codes and the lines. That's what they do. Then you have your invoice headers and lines. So guys, every time you process documents, you have a header that tells us who it's going to, the date, that type of thing, the total, whether there was VAT, whether there was discount. The lines tell us how it was made up. So we'll know that you processed invoice 539 to me for 50,000 and there was VAT on it with a 10% discount. That's it. The lines will tell me the item, so how that 50,000 came about. Guys, if you have missing lines, we cannot fix it. So we've had people before who they run a data integrity to check the history lines and they're like, I have missing lines, so you need to fix that. Guys, we have no idea what those lines were made up with. It's very regrettable, but it's not something that we can fix at all. So that's just something to bear in mind. So that is this fix, verify history lines only. What it does is it checks the headers, it checks the lines, and it will advise you that, hey, either you have lines and there's a missing header, that we can fix because we can create a header for lines, but we cannot create lines for headers. We don't know what that header was made up of. All that we know is that it's there. So you may find that you print that document and there are no lines. Guys, it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. Unless you know what it is, there's no ways to fix that. And hopefully you have a printout of before the lines disappeared. Those lines, unfortunately, can affect your inventory history. So that's something to bear in mind. So if you do have missing lines, guys, it's something that you need to get to the bottom of. Is it a network issue? Why are lines going missing? Do you need to delete history? Is this just a really old data set and it's time to start a new company, take on balances? Because history lines pull directly to view inventory history. This pulls directly from your inventory history lines. So if you have missing lines, these reports may be incorrect. The way to fix that is to do a stock take. That's how you make sure that the quantities that Pastel think you have is what you have, that the value of the stock is correct. But guys, these reports will be incorrect until you do a stock take. That's just something to bear in mind. So those are your history headers and history lines. Again, guys, rebuild only, you cannot overwrite them. If you overwrite those, because they work in conjunction, you are going to create a mess, and it's something we are not going to be able to fix. So you have to rebuild or restore. Then you've got your foreign cash book currency balances. So again, if you're using multi-currency and you've got a foreign cash book, it's going to have the foreign cash book currency balances. This is a rebuild only. If this file is corrupted, you're going to have to restore. If you're getting errors in your foreign bank where the rand and the foreign currency aren't gelling, you've done a revaluation, then guys, you need to send it in for Datafix and we'll take a look at it. Your point of sale audit, point of sale payout, point of sale payment, point of sale cash app, these are all your point of sale files. Now guys, these files technically can be overwritten with the ENGs, but only if you are not using point of sale. If you are using point of sale, you need to rebuild these files. And if a rebuild doesn't work, then you're going to need to restore a backup, because this contains all the information for your point of sale audit trail, your payments that go in and out of point of sale, as well as your cash apps. And this is the one that is written to partner, not in your documents.mdb file. So those of you who run point of sale access, you know it writes to your documents.mdb file. Those of you who run SQL, it writes to your SQL database. But these are the files that show in your partner or your express in your Pastel. If you're using point of sale, you cannot overwrite these files. If you don't use point of sale and you've got an error on these files, you can absolutely overwrite them. It's not a problem. Then guys, your ACC font file, this is your printer font setup. So this will look at the font that you've set up. This will look at this whole area. Sorry, not there. File printer font setup. So it will know what is the default printer, what are your main and title fonts, is a portrait landscape, are you getting the size directly from the printer, what is your paper style assistant, and it will know that for every tab and every user. So if you're getting an error here, you can always overwrite your ACC font file. So that is a file that you can absolutely overwrite. Just bearing in mind that it's then going to go and overwrite that printer font setup, and you will need to go back in there and just double check. Is my paper style correct? What font is it using? And just reset that up quickly. Guys, remember, when you set that up, you can copy to all documents and copy to all tabs. If you copy to all users, it will copy everything but the paper style assistant. The paper style assistant does not copy across users. So if you see that you need A4 for all users and you set it on one and you try to copy to the others, it's not going to work. Paper style assistant has to be set up per user, but printer, the font, and whether you get page size directly from printer, that copies across, but the paper style, no. Please bear that in mind, but this rebuild and overwrite. This does often corrupt, so you may find that this comes up. Just know you can overwrite it with the ENG from the custom forms folder. Custom language folder. You can overwrite it with that one. And then guys, you've got your abbreviation. Again, this is pulled from your abbreviations when you are processing either your cash book. So for example, you come here and you go description P, and it then says payment. So it's your abbreviations are set up here in your cash books and your journals. This, should you get an error on this file, whether it's a runtime error 5 or whether it is a status error telling you to rebuild, you can rebuild it. You can also overwrite it, and you're going to overwrite it from the one in custom language. So MAS, MASC, MASD, you overwrite from a working backup with the same financial year. The other rebuilds all are from, or the other overwrites, your note, your font file, it all comes from the custom language. What will happen though is it will reset it to these ones, and any that you have added, you will have to redo. So if you have to overwrite it, you have to redo it. So it's just the abbreviations. Absolutely, you can overwrite it from custom language, but you then will have to reset up all your abbreviations. Then guys, this is our report format file. ACC RPFMT. This is a rebuild only, and it is exactly what it says. It's a report format file. That's it. Then you've got your tax box. Guys, this contains all the information as per your tax box report. Can you overwrite it? Yes, but then it will reset the tax box to the system default. So if you have gone in to your setup tax and you have set up your general settings and you've gone to your tax box and you've set that all up very specifically, and guys, trust me, it is not a small feat to set that up. To our business partners and my tax consultants here, hats off to you. You need to know what you're doing. You normally do this under the advice of a tax consultant. It contains all of this information. So what am I debiting? What am I crediting? Where does it go? So these are your entry types. These are your tax types. So you look at the different tax types and you go, if I use this tax type, it needs to go here and it needs to show this. And when I print it to my box, this is what it's going to do. And it's going to use the box layout, and it's going to use a percentage of the tax type, and it's going to combine this one with that one to show this. Guys, you need a tax consultant. That's what that contains. Can you overwrite it? Yes, but it means that you will have to redo all of that work. So you can, but it does mean a redo if that's been done. If someone did it for you, so you had a tax consultant come out and do that for you, you will have to pay them to redo it. Then guys, our normal batches, you've got your ACC BT, and then it's normally BTN. So BTN is normally your cash books and your normal journals, whereas BTR is your recurring or post-dated batches and journals. Now these can neither be rebuilt nor overwritten. These, if you have an error in them, can only be deleted. And if they are deleted, it means they will disappear because they are an open batch. So it is open cash book batches, open journal batches, and open recurring batches. If you have to delete them, they will be gone forever and you will have to recapture them. You cannot rebuild them. It's not a rebuild and it's not an overwrite. They are just deleted and you have to recapture. Then guys, your stock file, you cannot rebuild or overwrite this file. This file checks very specific system settings. If this file stops, or you get an error on this file, it is a restore only. It cannot be rebuilt, it cannot be rewritten. Then your inventory journal batch, exactly the same as the normal journal batches, it's a delete. ACC, BSJ, that's it, and they're normally followed by a number. Then guys, your bank, this just shows your banking, so it's the details about your cash book batch. Can it be overwritten? Yes, I've never seen an error on this file though, so it's unlikely that you would ever need to rebuild or overwrite it. It just contains your banking details. Then your banking beneficiaries, same thing. ACC Euro, these are your Euro codes. It's when you go to setup and you set up those codes in the setup. Your report category codes, so this is for report writer again. Guys, this is your e-commerce file. Again, it's not a file that really corrupts. You can rebuild it, you can't overwrite it. If you do overwrite it, you need to not be using the e-commerce at all. You can't be using mobility, you can't be using online stores, otherwise it is not going to link. So much like point of sale, yes, it can be overwritten, but only if you're not using it. Then your ACC HRSTU, these are your user defined. So you have your HRSTU and your HRSTD. Guys, both of these can be overwritten by custom language. It is your user defined fields and their descriptions. Should there be an error and you try to rebuild them and you still get an error, can you overwrite them? Yes, you can. And you will just need to then go set up your user defined fields and descriptions again. So what that is edit, for example, edit inventory item file, and same with customers and suppliers, it is the user defined fields, guys. So that's what it is. So if you have user defined fields set up on customers, suppliers, or inventory and you get errors there, you will need to go and redo them if you overwrite them. Then you've got your multi-store and your multi-store transaction. Those are rebuild only. Again, guys, because of the linking, you cannot overwrite them from another backup or from the language file at all. No overwriting. Rebuild only. If you get an error, you are going to have to restore. So the multi-store file is your inventory. It shows your inventory movements. Yes, if you are going to use multi-stores, it adds in here. But even if you don't use multi-stores, these files are constantly in use because they are in use by your inventory. Even if you don't use multi-stores, you always have store 001. And that then links into there and there, and they link to each other, and they link every item to each other. It says which items are linked to what stores, what quantities are in the stores, the movement between the stores, the movement between your customers. So it's basically every inventory transaction runs through here, and every inventory item is stored here. So guys, these rebuild only. Your inventory categories are when you go to edit inventory and you set up your categories. Can you overwrite it? Yes, but then you will need to reset up all of your categories. That could cause a slight problem in the inventory items themselves. In the linking, you may have to do an export and then import again. Your store link is exactly that. It is the store link. And again, guys, this ties in with this, and they are all unique codes. It's not something that we can regenerate. Then banking details. I had oh, sorry guys, that is internet banking cash book. I think that these are to do with mobility. My mistake, I do apologize. Please do not overwrite these. These are actually to do with mobility. These are rebuild only. I've never seen them give issues, but those are rebuild only. The bank is the one that you can overwrite. ACC, BNK. Do not overwrite ACC bank or ACC BNF. That is to do with bank manager. It is to do with automatic bank feeds, please do not overwrite those, guys. You will break your bank feeds horribly. These are rebuilds only. This is a rebuild and an overwrite from custom language. Then your preferred supplier, guys, this is on your item. If you are using partner, you will be able to set up a preferred supplier. Again, guys, I've actually never seen this come up with an error needing a rebuild or actually have an error on it ever. But I would say rebuild this only. I would not say to overwrite it because I'm not sure about the linking, to be honest, because we've never had issues. I've never had to overwrite it, so I've never tried. Your ACC active, this is your activity file, which goes hand in hand with your employee file, which goes hand in hand with your employee activity file, which goes hand in hand with timesheet headers, which goes with timesheet lines, which goes in hand with time and billing parameters. So guys, all of these are to do with time and billing. Again, you would need to be using partner, and these are time and billing. All of these rebuild only. So the one contains all of your activities, the other contains all of your employee data. The employee activity shows what employees are linked to which activities. And then you've got your timesheets, headers and lines, much like your document headers and lines, much like your your manufacturing headers and lines. And then you have your parameters that go with those. And then guys, your receipt analysis code, all of this again is to do with receipting, which is another add-on module. Again, it is a rebuild. If you get an error, it is a restore. Then your history tax. This just shows the history of your tax. That's exactly what it is. It's a fairly new file. I've never seen it have an issue, but it would be a rebuild only. Do not overwrite that file. Again, there are unique codes within the tax files, especially with Tax Manager, and you don't want to disrupt those linking codes. Then user store is a rebuild at best. I've never actually seen it give an issue, but I would say rebuild only. Please do not overwrite it. Basically, it says what users can use what stores, and that goes with multi-stores. Then, guys, this one here is your serial numbers. Again, another add-on module for partner. And all that it shows you is your serial number master and your transactions, and they are a rebuild only. The serial number master contains all of the serial numbers you've created and what items they link to, whereas the transactions show whether they are at a customer, at a supplier, available to be sold, not available to be sold. And if you overwrite that, you're going to break the system. So rebuild only or restore. Then your Sage Intelligence report group. Guys, these ones here that I'm going through, I've never ever seen come up with any errors. So I cannot say that I would ever overwrite them. Personally, I would not overwrite these ever. I would only try to rebuild them, but they've never come up in the 12 years that I've been with Pastel. So this is just your Sage Intelligence reporting user. So it says what users can run which reports. Your GAAP categories. So that again is on your financial categories. There is a GAAP category that you can set up, and you can then link it on edit general ledger accounts. And then your user groups are exactly those. If you go to set up users groups, it is the user groups, all of their permissions, how they've been set up, what you've selected, and the user menu access. What access do your users have to the different menus? Now, these are obviously linked to your user as well as the user processing access. So that all goes hand in hand with ACC user.dat. That's why I said we need to reset it, because all of these link together. That's why you can't just overwrite. Then supplier categories are your supplier categories. Yes, you can overwrite them. You will just need to set them up, but bearing in mind that it could cause an issue with your supplier master, and you may have to export and import just to make sure that those categories pull through correctly. Then guys, your ACC MASB is your ledger balances for 5 years. Please do not overwrite this under any circumstance. These are your balances that are unique to you. You would need to rebuild. Again, user access, which goes with our user file. And then guys, all of these here are to do with project tracker. So again, these are rebuilds only. Please do not overwrite them. They all tie in with each other. There are linking codes that link to each other. Then you've got your company parameters. Parameter files cannot be rebuilt, cannot be overwritten. Your let files, guys, these are for very old Bank Manager. They're actually completely useless. They have no use anymore unless you're still using 2009. The let files were for Bank Manager 1. They do not contain your bank mappings anymore. That is your statement data.sdf, I think, in Bank Manager 2. But that was where your mappings were held in Bank Manager 1. Then guys, this is your tax manager setup, your tax manager periods, and your tax transactions. These all work hand in hand as well. So tax manager, that's where you go set up tax manager and you set everything up. You set up your periods. It will tell you your tax periods and your financial periods, and then all the transactions that run through it. These can be rebuilt. They should not be overwritten. The only time that these will be overwritten is if you have sent the data to us, and guys, to my knowledge, we don't even overwrite these files ever. I know that we may reset your bank manager settings, so technically this file would be an overwrite then, but then we make sure that these two link up and link properly again to make sure that the information is correct and accurate. Then you've got your mobility functions, guys. This is only if you use mobility, which is a mobile app. I've never seen this come up with errors. It would be a rebuild. If you had to rebuild, do not overwrite. They have very specific settings in them specific to your company. Automatic bank feeds. So that goes in with those banks up there, and net cash. And then guys, to be honest, I've actually never seen any of the bottom ones other than note, and I don't know why note is twice, other than notes have an issue. All of these I've never seen have an issue, and they're actually to do with pay now and net cash. So these, basically everything except parameter files can be rebuilt. As I said, you shouldn't really rebuild user because it could cause an issue, but you'll see if it causes an issue immediately. But everything can be rebuilt except for ACC PRM, and then whatever follows. If it has PRM in it, you don't rebuild it. Everything else can be rebuilt. And then the ones that I mentioned, notes, delivery, history, or the user-defined fields. So user-defined descriptions, those can be overwritten. Font file, they can be overwritten. Bank, overwritten. Then your customer master, your supplier master, and your general ledger master, those can be rewritten, but only with the same file from a working backup with the same financial year, and then it has to come in for a data fix. So that's the information in these files. Please let me know if there are any files that I didn't explain well or that you'd like more information on. But guys, those are the files in Pastel. That's the information that they contain. And as you can see, a lot of these files link to the others. It's why they cannot just be overwritten and rerun. And it's why you need to then either try to rebuild. If a rebuild doesn't work, you have to do a restore. Now, guys, right at the beginning, please start asking your questions now, but right at the beginning, I mentioned that you need to make a backup. And if you do a rebuild, especially a Pastel rebuild, people will get a status 2, a status 46, a 146, and they'll do a Pastel rebuild, and then they come in and, for example, they couldn't update their cash book. They go, they update their cash book, they go, oh, error's gone, and they carry on processing. Guys, the only reason that occurs is because the file that was corrupted is probably blank. So if that happens, whether you do a pervasive rebuild or a Pastel rebuild, before you do anything, go file data integrity, verify the data only, and see what errors you get. You should hopefully get no errors, or if there are mild errors, you can always say, hey guys, I had this error, I did this, here are a couple of errors, or what do? We will then tell you either, hey, restore a backup, or hi, don't worry, this is a data fix, please send it in, because maybe you had open item corruption before this, and it was a data fix anyway. So guys, that's something just to bear in mind. You don't really want errors, but you should run that every time you do a rebuild. Those are the files you can rebuild. The ones you can overwrite as explained are the ones you can overwrite. I just want to see if there are any questions. I'm not seeing any come up. I just want to go in and see, because I know Nancy has been answering those. Okay, so guys, I'm not seeing any questions about this, so please send your questions through now. Otherwise, guys, that is basically what I wanted to explain in this session. These are the tables. This is what they are. This is what they have. And this is whether you can rebuild them or not. This recording will be made available to you tomorrow. As always, if you guys have any questions about the webinar or the previous recordings you would like, you're welcome to email me, joanne.barnard@sage.com, and I will then respond to that email, send you the recording, answer the question about the webinar. Guys, support queries, please do not send to me, especially this week. I actually am technically on leave, and I'm only going to reply to all of you on Monday next week anyway, to those of you that do reply to me. So please do not send me your report queries for support. So I have this error, I have this problem, this isn't working, I need help. That needs to go through to supportsa@sage.com. So guys, please just bear that in mind. Otherwise, guys, if you don't have any questions, it's for the session. Thank you so much for joining me. I do hope that you found this useful and that I will see you at future webinars. For those of you that are interested, guys, next week, Thursday, I am running a webinar on Sage Business Cloud Accounting versus Sage 50 Cloud Pastel. So I'm doing a comparison between the two, cloud enabled versus cloud native. And I go through the differences between the two. If you want to sign up for that, please go to Sage City. There's a post there with the link, and I'll be running that on Thursday. Otherwise, guys, I hope that you have a fantastic day, and I will see you in another webinar. Thank you so much.